I spent over 130 grand on what I honestly believed was the future of driving, and less than halfway through one family road trip, I was standing in a parking lot staring at a battery gauge that said I had 12 miles left, wondering if I'd just made the dumbest financial decision of my life. I swear, if someone had told me that was how this story would end before I bought the truck, I would have laughed right in their face. But that's exactly what happened. A couple of months before all this, I was probably the biggest electric truck fan you'd ever meet. Every lunch break, every evening after work, every weekend I was watching reviews, comparing range estimates, reading forums, convincing myself that this wasn't just another vehicle. It was an investment. It was the future. Gas prices weren't getting any cheaper, and every commercial made it sound like buying electric meant freedom. Lower maintenance. Lower fuel costs. Better technology. Better everything. By the time I finally walked into the dealership, I'd already made up my mind. The salesman smiled the second he saw me looking at the truck. "So, this is the one?" I nodded. "I've been thinking about it for months." "You won't regret it." Funny how those 4 words can echo in your head later. When all the paperwork was finished, I had spent around $130,000 before taxes. That number still makes me shake my head. My wife looked at me after we got home and said, "So, we're really doing this?" I grinned. "We're not buying a truck." "No? We're buying the future." She laughed. "You sound like one of those commercials." "I know. But you're happy." "I really am." And I was. For weeks, every excuse was a reason to drive it somewhere. Grocery store? Truck. Hardware store? Truck. Coffee run? Definitely truck. Neighbors wandered over whenever it sat in the driveway. "Mind if I look inside? How fast is it? What's the range?" I'd answer every question like I worked for the company. "Oh, it's amazing. It's so quiet. The acceleration is insane. I'll never go back to gas." Looking back, I probably sounded unbearable. Owning it wasn't cheap either. People love talking about saving money with electric vehicles, but nobody really mentions everything that comes before the savings. I had electricians come over to upgrade the electrical panel at the house. Then came the charger installation. More paperwork. More invoices. More money. I remember looking at another bill and joking, "Well, at least after this, I won't have to think about gas stations." My wife smirked. "I hope you're right." "So do I." A few weeks later, we decided it was finally time to put the truck through a real test. Not driving across town. Not commuting to work. A proper road trip. Winnipeg to Chicago. Around 1,400 miles altogether. If this truck could handle that, I'd never question my purchase again. The night before we left, I checked everything twice. Charging cable. Luggage. Route. Battery. Charging stops. Every charger was marked on my phone. I even had backup locations saved just in case. I remember feeling almost smug. See? Everyone says road trips with an EV are impossible. They just don't plan properly. That was honestly my attitude. The next morning, we pulled out of the driveway before sunrise. The truck was completely silent except for the soft hum of the tires rolling over the pavement. It actually felt futuristic. "This is nice," my wife said. "Right? So quiet. No engine noise. No vibration. She leaned back in her seat. I could get used to this. So could I. For the first few hours, everything went exactly as planned. Crossing into the United States felt exciting. The truck handled beautifully. Cruise control did most of the work. The ride was smooth, comfortable, relaxing. I kept glancing at the battery percentage every now and then, mostly out of habit. Still looking good. Still on schedule. See? Nothing to worry about. Eventually we reached our first planned charging stop in North Dakota. I pulled into the charging station feeling surprisingly confident. Perfect, I said. Right on time. We plugged in. The screen lit up. Charging started. And then we waited. And waited. And waited some more. At first it didn't bother me. Road trips usually involve stopping anyway. Stretch your legs. Grab a coffee. Use the restroom. No big deal. But after what felt like forever, I checked my watch. Almost an hour. Seriously? It's charging, my wife said. I know. Another coffee. Another walk around the parking lot. Another glance at the screen. Eventually I checked again. Still charging. I laughed. You know, with a gas truck we'd already be back on the highway. She raised an eyebrow. Don't start. I'm just saying. Finally, nearly 2 hours later, we were still standing there. People pulled in. Filled their tanks. Left. More people arrived. Filled up. Left again. We were still waiting beside the charger. At one point I looked over at another driver pumping gasoline. He finished in maybe 4 minutes. He climbed back into his truck. Gone. I looked back at our charging cable. Well. My wife couldn't help laughing. Future, huh? Don't. I'm just teasing. I know. Eventually, after roughly 2 hours, the charging session finally wrapped up. I unplugged the cable, climbed back into the driver's seat, and checked what we'd gained. About 215 miles. I stared at the number for a second longer than I probably should have. Huh? What? I guess I expected more. Is it enough? Yeah. I paused. It should be. Those last 2 words would stay in my head for the rest of the trip. I started the truck again, pulled back onto the highway, and tried convincing myself everything was fine. Sure, we'd spent around $56 and nearly 2 hours sitting at one charging stop, but maybe this was just the slow charger. Maybe the next one would be better. Maybe once we got farther south, there would be more stations, faster stations, newer stations. I kept repeating those little maybes in my head while the miles rolled by. The truck drove beautifully, and for a while I almost forgot about the lost time. But every few minutes, almost without realizing it, my eyes drifted back to one thing: the battery percentage. It wasn't the road anymore that had my attention. It was that little number slowly counting down, mile after mile, as we headed toward Minnesota. And that was when the real trip began. The farther we got into Minnesota, the quieter the truck seemed to become. Not because anything had changed mechanically, it was still gliding down the highway as smoothly as ever, but because nobody inside was talking much anymore. Every few minutes I'd glance at the battery percentage, then at the navigation screen, then back at the road. I was doing math in my head without even realizing it. We're good, right? My wife finally asked. Yeah. You hesitated. I didn't. You absolutely did. I forced a smile. We're fine. That answer sounded a lot more convincing in my head than it did out loud. The navigation kept insisting the next charging station was just ahead. 23 miles. 21. 19. Easy. No problem. Then the little battery estimate dropped another mile even though we'd barely driven one. I frowned. Huh? What? Nothing. What does nothing mean? It just recalculated. She looked at the screen. It keeps changing. They do that. Is that normal? I think so. The truth was, I had no idea. For weeks I'd watched reviewers talk about range estimates adapting to weather, speed, elevation, even the wind. They all acted like it was perfectly normal. It felt a lot less normal when my family was sitting beside me. A few miles later we rolled into the charging plaza shown on the map. I actually smiled. There it is. Finally. I pulled into the parking lot. And my smile disappeared. Every charger was dark. No lights. No screens. Nothing. I parked anyway. Maybe they were rebooting. Maybe I was missing something. I climbed out, walked over to the nearest charger and tapped the screen. Nothing. Tried another. Still nothing. A guy standing beside an SUV looked over at me. Don't bother. They down? They've been down since this morning. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes your brain doesn't know what else to do. Seriously? He nodded. I've been on customer support for 45 minutes. I looked around. 3 other electric vehicles sat scattered around the lot. Nobody looked happy. One driver was pacing. Another kept refreshing something on his phone. Someone else was leaning against a charger with both hands on his head. It looked less like a charging station and more like an airport after every flight had been cancelled. I walked back toward the truck. My wife rolled the window down. Well? Not great. Define not great. They're offline. She blinked. All of them? Looks like it. You've got to be kidding. I wish I was. For the next 20 minutes we became detectives. I searched every charging app one had downloaded. One said the station was online. Another marked it as unavailable. A third showed it under maintenance. None of them agreed with each other. I refreshed the map again. Maybe another station nearby. There was one. 32 miles away. I checked our remaining range. 26. Okay. What? That one's too far. She stared at me. So what now? I didn't answer. Because I honestly didn't know. I called customer support. After navigating what felt like 15 automated menus, someone finally answered. Thank you for calling. I explained everything. She asked for the station number. I read it. Silence. Typing. I'm sorry, sir. I kind of guessed that already. It appears those chargers are currently unavailable. I noticed. I apologize for the inconvenience. Is there another station nearby? More typing. There is one approximately 31 miles from your location. I looked at the dashboard. 24 miles remaining. That's not happening. I'm very sorry. So, what exactly do you suggest? I'm unable to provide roadside recommendations. Of course she wasn't. After hanging up, I just sat there for a minute. Hands on the steering wheel. Looking through the windshield. Not saying a word. My wife quietly broke the silence. You okay? No. No? I've never spent this much money on something that made me feel this helpless. She reached over and squeezed my arm. We'll figure it out. I know. At least I hoped we would. Then I remembered reading something online. Sometimes dealerships had chargers. Ford dealership. I searched. One appeared on the map. Close enough that, maybe. That word again. Everything about this trip had become, maybe. Maybe the charger works. Maybe the estimate is accurate. Maybe we'll make it. I entered the destination. 22 miles. Battery estimate. 23. I looked at my wife. She looked at me. Neither of us said anything. We both understood what those numbers meant. If the estimate was wrong, we weren't making it. I eased back onto the highway. No sudden acceleration. No unnecessary passing. The air conditioning suddenly felt like a luxury I wasn't sure we could afford. I turned the fan down. My wife noticed. Trying to save power? Maybe. Does that even help? I honestly don't know. She laughed. Not because it was funny. Because the whole situation had become ridiculous. So we've reached the point where we're negotiating with the air conditioner. Apparently. The battery dropped again. 20 miles. Then 19. Every mile marker suddenly mattered. Every hill looked bigger than before. Every passing truck made me wonder if I should draft behind it. I had become obsessed with efficiency. Not scenery. Not the trip. Just numbers. The kids in the SUV beside us at one stoplight were laughing with milkshakes in their hands. I found myself thinking. They're probably having a better road trip than we are. The battery chimed. Low battery. A soft sound. But it hit me like a fire alarm. There it is, I muttered. What? The warning. Neither of us spoke for another few miles. Traffic seemed slower. Time moved slower. Even breathing felt louder inside the cabin. The navigation finally announced, your destination is ahead. I almost smiled. Then I looked. The dealership was closed. The building was dark. Only a few security lights illuminated the lot. Please tell me they left the chargers on. I slowly drove in. There it was. One charger. Dark. Another. Dark. I stopped the truck. Battery remaining. 12 miles. Exactly 12. Nobody said anything. I just rested both hands on the steering wheel. Stared straight ahead. After everything we'd invested. After every optimistic conversation. After every review I'd watched telling me this was the future. My futuristic truck was sitting silently in a dark dealership parking lot with 12 miles left and nowhere left to charge. My wife finally whispered, so? I let out the longest sigh of my life. I think, we're officially stranded. And for the first time since buying the truck, I wasn't thinking about technology anymore. I was thinking about one simple question. How on earth was I supposed to get my family to Chicago now? For about 30 seconds, nobody moved. The truck was still powered on, but it felt like everything had stopped. The dashboard glowed softly in front of me, the battery icon looked almost empty, and outside the windshield the dealership lot was completely still. One lonely security light buzzed above the service entrance. My wife finally broke the silence. So, now what? I rubbed both hands across my face. I honestly don't know. You've always got a plan. Not this time. She gave me a small smile. Well, that's kind of terrifying. It is. I reached for my phone again, even though I knew what I was going to find. No working charger. No nearby alternatives. No miracle waiting on the map. Still, I searched anyway. Nothing. I leaned back in the seat and laughed quietly. What? I've refreshed these apps like 20 times. Maybe the 21st time is lucky. I'd settle for the 50th. Neither of us was really joking anymore. I called roadside assistance. After another endless menu and another wait that somehow felt longer than the charging stop back in North Dakota, someone finally answered. Roadside assistance, how may I help you? My truck's stranded. Can you describe the issue? I looked at the dashboard. Ironically, it works perfectly. I'm sorry. It drives. Okay. It just doesn't have anywhere to charge. There was a short pause. I understand. I wasn't sure she actually did, but she was trying. She took our location, confirmed the dealership address, and said a tow truck would be dispatched. Estimated arrival time? Approximately 90 minutes. 90? That's our current estimate. I thanked her, hung up, and looked over at my wife. 90 minutes. She sighed. Guess we're staying here. Outside, the evening air had cooled off. We stepped out of the truck and stretched our legs. The parking lot was almost empty except for a couple of employee vehicles parked near the building. Every few minutes a car drove past on the road beyond the dealership, disappearing into the darkness. I stared at my truck. It still looked incredible. The paint reflected the parking lot lights. The wheels were spotless. If someone drove by, they'd probably think I was admiring my brand new purchase. Instead, I was wondering how something that looked so advanced could leave us completely stuck. My wife walked over beside me. You still love it? I took a few seconds before answering. I love driving it. But I don't love depending on it. She nodded. I figured. An hour later, the tow truck finally rolled into the lot. The driver climbed out, looked at my truck, then looked at me. Battery? Yeah. Happens more often than you'd think. That surprised me. Really? He shrugged. Road trips can be rough. He wasn't rude. He wasn't mocking me. If anything, he sounded sympathetic. While he secured the truck onto the flatbed, I stood there with my hands in my pockets watching one expensive lesson slowly rise into the air. I never imagined my dream truck would spend part of its first major vacation riding on the back of another truck. The irony wasn't lost on me. The driver closed everything up. Where to? The Ford dealership. He nodded. Let's get you there. The short ride felt strangely quiet. When we finally reached the dealership's service area, an employee came outside after hearing what had happened. He listened patiently while I explained everything. No working chargers where you stopped. No. Battery dropped to 12 miles? Exactly. He nodded again. We'll take a look in the morning. So, that's it for tonight? I'm afraid so. I looked over at my wife. Chicago was still waiting. Our vacation wasn't. Standing there, I realized something. Even if the truck was fixed first thing in the morning, we'd already lost too much time. I turned back toward the service advisor. Is there anywhere nearby that rents vehicles? There is. He gave me directions. 20 minutes later we were standing at a rental counter. The employee smiled. What can I get you folks into today? I looked at the available vehicles. You've got anything that'll definitely make it to Chicago? He chuckled. Most of them. I'll take one. What kind? I didn't even hesitate. Gas. He slid the paperwork toward me. As I signed everything, I couldn't help laughing. A week earlier I'd been telling friends I'd never need another gas vehicle again. Now I was renting one just to finish the trip my brand new electric truck couldn't. Life has a strange sense of humor. The next morning we loaded our bags into the rental car. I turned the key. The engine started instantly. We pulled into a gas station before getting back on the highway. 5 minutes later we were finished. I stood there holding the receipt. I looked at my wife. She looked back at me. That was fast. Yeah. No apps. No charger maps. No waiting. No calculations. Just fuel. Back on the interstate, the miles disappeared beneath us. For the first time since entering Minnesota, I wasn't constantly watching a battery percentage. I wasn't wondering whether the next charger worked. I wasn't mentally subtracting miles from an estimated range. I was just driving. Somewhere outside Wisconsin, my wife glanced over and smiled. You seem less stressed. I didn't even realize how stressed I'd become. You checked the dashboard every 30 seconds. Did I? Pretty much. I laughed. Guess I did. By the time the Chicago skyline finally appeared in the distance, I should have felt excited. Instead, I mostly felt relieved. The trip had turned into something completely different from what I'd imagined. When friends asked later how the new truck handled on its first long journey, I usually paused before answering. Because the truth wasn't simple. The truck itself drove beautifully. It was quiet. Comfortable. Smooth. Everything I'd hoped for behind the wheel. But road trips aren't just about how a vehicle drives. They're about getting where you're going. Without constantly wondering if you'll make it. Without building your schedule around charging stops. Without praying the next station actually works. I never told people electric vehicles were terrible. That wasn't the lesson I took away. The lesson was much simpler. Technology can be impressive. Advertisements can be convincing. Numbers on paper can look perfect. But nothing replaces real experience. Sometimes you don't truly learn what you've bought until you're hundreds of miles from home with your family depending on you. Looking back now, I don't remember every highway we drove or every town we passed through. I remember the charger that never turned on. The dashboard showing 12 miles. The silence inside the truck. The tow truck arriving under those parking lot lights. And I definitely remember standing at the rental counter asking for the most ordinary gas-powered vehicle they had. If you'd asked me before that trip what the future of driving looked like, I would have pointed proudly at my truck. If you asked me afterward, I'd probably smile, shrug, and say something a little different. The future's great. As long as you can actually get there.